well.
Okay.
Karen, can you check to see if Niru is in the waiting room?
Yeah, let me
There's a
check.
thing that she's waiting.
Does not look like it. So,
So the link you shared, Karen, does not work. Hong Mei sent a different link, which had a registration questionnaire, which you had to fill out before I showed up in your waiting room.
oh, yeah, I'm so sorry.
It's okay. I just don't want her waiting and then I have to drop off.
Right,
So let's
right.
get started. What can I do to get you
Let's,
started?
Um, so maybe why don't we do this? Let me work on getting Niru the right link. So I'm gonna give her a call. But why don't we get started and then I will troubleshoot maybe with Ruben, if you're open to that. Thank you.
yes. All right, we're gonna just jump in with the questions.
Okay.
As I mean, we're just gonna go. I have some questions
Go for
here.
it. Ready, go.
Okay. The multi-year projection shows that even with no reductions, the deficit would naturally decline to about 19 million by fiscal year 27-28. Why then is the district proposing 50 million cuts during that same period?
Oh, great question. You must have somebody that actually reads all those charts. That's really great.
Yes, definitely.
So if you look at that chart, and I am able to share my screen if anybody needs me to bring it up and I can have you follow along, I'm happy to do that. So the reductions that you're seeing are natural. They're not a result of any action, and they're natural because of annual increases of cost of living increases to our revenues. So what you'll notice on those slides is that the deficit is going down because of the cost of living allowance increases from the state. They're not going down because of a decrease in expenses. The other thing to keep in mind, so that statement is factually true. However, remember that our biggest revenue drivers for our future years have not yet been submitted, right? And those are increases for our bargaining units in salary increases. In other words, contractual salary increases or pay raises. And so, just to give you an idea of what to do, if anybody wants to do sort of back of the envelope math, a 1% for our UE, which is our paraeducators and teachers union, equates to about between 11 and $12 million a year for each 1%. There's Niru. And a 1% for SEIU, which is our classified union, equates to between $5 and $6 million per year. And so you can do the back of the envelope math because raises are still open for this year and future years. And of course, once negotiated, they affect every year in the multi-year projection, right? So if we assume as a concept a 2% raise, that would be 22 million for UE and another 12 million for SEIU. So we'd be talking about $34 million per year compounded, right? And so the largest cost drivers to our budget in the current year, as well as the next 2 years, are still not appearing until negotiations are settled. And so the concept of the fiscal stabilization plan, it's required that we submit one if the district is in negative or qualified budget to CDE. And the goal of the fiscal stabilization plan is to bring the uh, the unrestricted general fund into balance. And so the plan that we've submitted brings it into balance for this year, knowing that we still have a bunch of unrealized costs for this year and the next 2 years based on negotiations still being open. So what that allows us to do is the board doesn't actually when they pass the FSP, they aren't actually doing reductions. They're providing parameters for us to determine what reductions could be once those costs are in. And of course, if those costs reductions include people, statutorily, we have to submit all of those things by no later than March 15th to do any layoffs in a school district. And so what that means is that we're actually aiming for a target and we're generating layoffs or reductions based on the idea of projecting what the deficit will be once negotiations are settled. So it's a pretty complex way of having to do year-to-year reductions. And so the FSP gives us that room to maneuver assuming that they're going to settle in the school year. They might not even settle till the next school year, and then it might be retroactive. So it's sort of a complex way of having to balance the budget.
Chris, Chris, I'm Ruben Diaz, and
Yeah,
Karen and
Ruben,
I
we
will
met at
be.
the town halls. How are you?
Yes, we will be taking turns asking you questions. And I
Sure.
also saw a comment in the chat asking you to show charts and tables when it's relevant to help us understand what you're saying.
Okay. Great.
And one other request is jargon. I heard you say fiscal FSP, fiscal stabilization plan. So
Yep.
help us with those acronyms, please.
Sure.
Here's the next question. Given that the district can meet all expenses for this year and the next 2 years while maintaining both the 2% reserve for economic uncertainty and an $88 million local reserve, why isn't the first interim certification positive? What specific factors led to a qualified certification?
Wow, that's a great question. I hope you're all seeing Niru smiling. So technically, I did get us already back to positive certification, and that's what you're actually noticing. The problem with that is that technical certification, we were able to do it through better budget controls and fiscal management so quickly that the CDE is not going to endorse a positive certification so quickly. And so you're absolutely correct on whoever figured that out. They are tracking 100% correctly. But because we were able to do that because of our knowledge so quickly and putting in budget controls, CDE does not believe that the board's going to be able to maintain that because of their prior historic inability to stay to good budget constraints. And so the most that we could push that envelope in the progress for the district right now is moving from negative to a qualified. If we're able to maintain it through the end of the year, then we will lessen their ability to object to us moving to positive. Does that make sense for you, Ruben?
That wasn't my question, but
okay.
you can continue.
Okay.
Yeah, this is mostly the questions that parents have submitted. So we're just
Okay,
going
great.
with that.
Thanks,
Yes.
Karen.
Yeah. So the next question, will there be more cuts for all school sites, and what could there be, and how to ensure quality education is so, if so?
So no one can predict that. So the budget is based so much on the costs. And until we know what costs are in a stable manner, we can't predict whether we're in a deficit or not. So as I've already mentioned, the current outstanding costs are for our largest bargaining units, which represent, if we combine those two, probably over 90% of our employees. Those are our biggest cost drivers. And so we got to a qualified, and as somebody already noticed, a technical positive certification without those costs yet known. So as soon as those costs hit, then it's going to change the picture again, and then we will have to reevaluate and resubmit our certification and our evaluation of the fiscal health of the school district. And this is where people, I think, get a little baffled, because that means that the budget always changes. And indeed, the budget always does change. Every time we get a new variable in place, or a new settlement or agreement reached, or a new expense, we add it to the budget and it changes. So the goal of the district has been not just getting back to positive certification, so that we have more maneuverability locally. It's also been, can we do enough of a reduction this year that next year we can take a break from reductions? Because doing reductions year after year after year takes a toll on a community and a school district and the system that's hard to sustain. And so we were already looking, this is already going to be our second year of reductions. So we were trying to do enough of a reduction that we don't have to look at reductions in the future years, at least get a 1-year break. To do that, we have to do enough of a reduction to accommodate whatever the settlement on salaries is going to be and balance the general fund in the same year. Knowing, as well as get probably a multi-year agreement on negotiation so that we have some stability for the year and the district can sort of culturally take a break. So that's the goal. Will we achieve it? It's sort of a running process to try to do exactly that.
The next question is, based on where we underspent last year compared to the budget cuts this year, when will we know if we're on track to solvency?
Say that one more time, please, Ruben.
Based on where we underspent last year compared to the budget cuts this year, when will we know if we're on track to solvency?
So we are on track to solvency right now. If I could keep all expenses exactly as they are right now, then the earlier observation that you are already technically back to a positive certification are correct. In other words, we would be positive certification by the end of this year. Now, that doesn't mean that the deficit is closed, but it means that we have enough cash to pay for the deficit for the current plus 2 years. But as I mentioned before, costs don't stay the same. So as we get in those new wage increases, it's going to increase the deficit. And then we have to try to rebalance the budget again and see if we can find enough resources internally, which means reducing costs to pay for increases in salaries. That's the situation the district or any district is in when they're in a deficit situation. So we have to wait to get those numbers in and then see what we have to cut to be able to get back to a positive certification.
Great. Next question. What is your realistic budgetary transparency plan look like for the future? How will the least fortunate students be impacted?
Great question. Yeah, and I come with a little bit of a different lens. I'm a principal and a teacher, and I was a principal and a teacher of Title I schools, so in Los Angeles as well as New York. So I have a bit of a different lens on this. So transparency is an issue, not because the documents aren't available, but school budget is a different animal, and I think it's a little difficult to understand, which is why I try to explain it sort of in household terms as best as I can. I'm used to having more data and being able to provide more transparency, for example, in the last couple of districts, because we have better data. San Francisco has struggled with its systems and getting good budget data. So moving forward, I know I can make it better. It's tough, though, looking backward. The other thing that I'm struggling with is, so for example, we have some raw data, but we don't have the talent internally in San Francisco to publish the types of dashboards that are real-time and interactive that I'm used to publishing. So I've actually requested that we be able to recruit somebody that's good at illustrating those things in real time that can be live on our website, but we have yet to find anybody. And it's fascinating. It's sort of it's a tech town, right? But for what school districts pay, it's tough to find somebody that seems to be able to do that. It's frankly my biggest frustration, because my data dashboards in other districts are really, really robust. But we just don't seem to have the resources, especially again, when we're in a deficit situation. So I would really like to move to that model. I think it's the right model to move to. Now, how does balancing impact our learners who are experiencing the most barriers to success? In my mind, those are my Title I and UPP students. And what do I mean by that? So Title I is low socioeconomic. UPP in the state of California is low socioeconomic, foster and homeless students, as well as English language learners. And we do that because we provide more resources to those schools in an attempt to help overcome those barriers. That's the whole concept of Title I and compensatory education, as well as our provision of additional resources to those schools, is so that there's more resource there for students to overcome and teachers to help them overcome those barriers. Is it always effective? No, because I don't think we get enough of that money to do that with, but we do differentiate the resources and provide more to our schools with the majority of those students.
Chris, I have the next question, but I do have I'm looking at the clock and I think it's 6:30, and I know you need to leave at 7, and I'm wondering if Niru would be able to answer the questions continuing from here. I don't know if she's a new employee at SFUSD, and I know she'll be taking over at 7 to 7:30.
Yeah. So I invited her because I had a hard stop. She's more than able. Like so far, all the questions that I've answered, I know Niru is more than able to answer. These are typical budget questions for school district budgets, and she's a very experienced budget expert. So we can go. How about this? We'll go back and forth, and we'll take turns, and that way she can slide into the role easily.
Welcome, Niru.
Thank you.
The next question is, why are cuts to programming that impacts our most vulnerable being made?
You want me to do that one, Niru?
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, that's less of a technical fiscal question.
Yeah.
So I think you can look at that question in a couple of different ways. There are no cuts being proposed as part of a fiscal stabilization that actually target our highest need schools. That's actually why we're supplementing resources going to our highest need schools with Title I and restricted funding. So I don't think any of the proposed cuts adversely impact those schools with the most students who experience barriers to success in public education. But the schools that don't have the highest percentage of those students, basically, if we leave those resources intact at our highest needs schools, it basically precludes that we need to not have some of those resources at our less high need schools. That doesn't mean that, especially as an educator, actually, and it's ironic, I think Niru and I are probably two of the only finance people that have also both been teachers in our life. But you would never hear an educator say that there's a school that doesn't need more resources, but the reality is that they're finite. And so we've protected the ones at our neediest schools. And so I think my concern actually is if I put them into bands as far as neediest to least needy, our least needy schools tend to have some of their needs met more by PTO and PTA donations, which are beyond the school district's control. I tend to worry actually about the schools that fall into that middle area of they are not highest need as far as low socioeconomic or other students that have barriers to success. And they are not the schools that have PTAs and PTOs that sort of provide additional resources. They're the ones that fall in the middle. However, we are still providing all of the standard things to those schools: principals, counselors, teachers in classrooms, all of that kind of stuff. So I don't think that the proposed reductions in any way look like we are taking away more from our neediest schools.
A parent here, can I make a comment?
Sure, go ahead.
Yes,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah. Let me try and put my camera on. Yeah. So I understand, Chris, your response, right? But I'm a Nirupama parent, and then we may be in the least needy category that you just mentioned, and we have one of the decently funded PTAs, right? And despite that, I don't believe we are able to fund a social worker here directly by ourselves, which doesn't mean that our need is any lesser. The ideal way, I don't know, you guys would have thought this through, but can we have a shared resource at least, have between the less needy schools, have one person do rounds across 3 different schools? Because yeah, we may be less needy, but there are students here who go to this school who need help from social workers, who have IEPs, and who also need referrals to different sources, right? So yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. Is it Joshi?
Yeah.
Good question. So remember that the allocation model that we shared is just what's provided centrally by the school district. A lot of our funding, remember, is also at the school site, not just through PTA and PTO Joshi, but also through discretionary money that we provide to the school to hire staff beyond our base allocation. And a lot of our school sites also have, as I mentioned, PTA, PTO resources, but they also have grants. And so they do a lot of hiring on their own as well. And so that's still allowed in the case of social workers as well as more assistant principals. They also usually hire a lot of extra para educators. So there will be some decisions made locally at the school sites as well. I also want to caution that the real decisions, again, are not made as far as what we can afford. So this is just the first preliminary swipe, if you will, until we get those increases in raises and we see what we have perhaps still available in restricted resources. And we do have some restricted resources in the district. So we are analyzing those. Niru and I do that, and we are seeing, okay, after negotiations settle, where might we still have some fund balances or some carry forwards to provide for things such as social workers. And in fact, social workers, we've heard the community that's the top priority that they're concerned about being eliminated. It is of mine and the superintendent's as well. And so we are looking for, once the dust settles on negotiations, where might we have some restricted resources that we can pick up some social workers for a year or two. So we are definitely doing that work. I just can't predict that now. It's just, we just don't have enough time, and the variables are just too many for me to clearly answer that right now.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Please remember to mute yourself. Karen, I think you had the next question.
Yes. Are the payroll issues resolved? Is it possible to see a summary budget that then rolls out to district and school level?
Niru, you want to try that one?
So I think those are two separate questions, right? The first question is about payroll. I would hesitate to say all payroll issues are resolved, but that's something we're actively working on and resolving, through each pay period. We are limiting, this last pay, I think there was about 20 employees affected, and that's been resolved within 24 hours. So we're not seeing widespread payroll errors as there may have been earlier this year. I think most of the majority of those concerns have been resolved, if that helps answer your question. But with respect to budgets at school sites, that is something that we're still working on, as Chris mentioned earlier, about adding transparency and creating dashboards that might be public facing. That's something that we still need to work on.
I have the next question. Is in a time of further budget reductions, to what extent are PTAs going to be restricted in terms of where they can compensate?
We've been.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Nidru. I can fill in if you.
Yeah, I'm not aware of restrictions. I believe the PTA actually gets to decide that. I'm not aware of PTA restrictions around labor, about compensation, about purchasing positions.
So we did delay them this past year, and the reason was not just PTAs, but some of our local restricted resources were being so aggressive at hiring people that we hadn't filled our classrooms, and they were hiring additional teachers. And so the rule became, using that example, classroom teachers first, make sure that we have a qualified teacher in each classroom before supplemental hiring takes a teacher out of a classroom, because the goal is a teacher in every classroom first. So common sense approaches like that, we have to continue. However, we are providing additional flexibility for our principals this year to be faster at the use of their restricted monies that are local, and that does include PTA and PTO money. I am also seeing in the chat that PTAs and PTOs should not have to make up shortfalls for district budget. I couldn't agree more. It is voluntary, right? So never should a PTA or PTO suggest or imply that it's required for folks to do something or to donate to pay for an additional teacher's salary. They are addition beyond the base. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't want them, but it does mean that, yes, that's not the expectation, but that is the way that some of our communities operate. Not all of them, is that they want to fill in the gaps because we have a good-hearted and well-intentioned community. But the goal of the district is not to have the PTAs and PTOs fill in the gaps. They are providing additional to the base allocation to their school sites.
And to follow up on that question, the next question is, what funding restrictions are being imposed on PTAs? Can PTAs self-fund coaches, APs, social workers?
Right. So going back to what I noted earlier, I'm not aware of any restrictions of what PTAs, that PTAs would be limited to any specific group of job classes if they elect to fund. I believe that's their discretion.
The next question has to do with charter schools. Is SFUSD helped or further in the red due to district charter schools?
Wow, that's a controversial topic. So San Francisco is a little unusual. For a district of 50,000 students, we actually don't have a ton of students in charter schools. It's about 6,000. So it's definitely measurable, and we do provide oversight to those charters. However, it's not as large of a percentage as most districts, and that's because San Francisco loses more students to private schools and parochial schools than we do to charters. The history and the trends in San Francisco lean more towards wealthier families choosing parochial schools and private schools. And it has been that way, by the way, for decades. And we specifically see people go there if they don't start in elementary school. We see them go there mostly in the transition between elementary and middle and high school. And it's hard to compete with those models because they're completely different models than a public school. But do we have a lot of charter school students? We have about 6,000 currently.
I just wanted to follow up on that. How does it affect the budget? Does it take away from non-charter public schools?
I mean, so that I said it's controversial because that's a controversial topic. So if the idea is that a charter student would automatically go into the public school, then we would get the funding for that student for the year. But what we've seen in the past is that if a charter school goes away, so I've worked in a lot of districts providing charter oversight, and let's say one of them goes away, all of those students actually don't come to the public school. A lot of them might go to a private school or another charter school, or they go to a parochial school, or they get homeschooled. So it's not a one-to-one equation. A lot of folks that I would generally put in the not favorable to charter bucket promote this argument that it's a direct one-to-one correlation, that every charter school student would end up in a public school. And we know that the data says that's not true. On the other side of that spectrum, the idea that charters compete on the exact same playing field is also not true. We know that charters tend to attract parents that have more mobility, more engagement, and that they serve typically fewer special education students, and public schools have to serve everybody. So there's different sides of that argument. That's why I said it's a little complicated.
Karen, can I read the one that came in the chat?
Sure.
It's a question.
Yeah,
it's
go ahead.
sort of related. It's sort of related to what we're talking about. The district is projecting increases revenue based on cost of living, but does the district have a plan to attract more students and increase enrollment revenue? What will happen if these cuts cause more exodus, leading to less revenue than expected? For example, no social workers leads to less well-being and less desire to be in school.
I can try and take that one. So currently we're forecasting about a 1% decline in enrollment every year. And you're absolutely correct that if by chance that the enrollment decline becomes more severe, then yes, we will have a decrease in revenues. That is correct. But another thing that we also have to be mindful of that does impact our revenue is the cost of living increases. So the legislative analyst office has already signaled that the cost of living increases may reduce this coming January. So that is something else that we need to monitor as well. That's a bit beyond our control. That has more of an impact actually that are at this time within this given window over the next few months. It's something that we do need to be very mindful of as it impacts our next interim projection.
Lori, go ahead.
Hey guys, I'm the Vice President of Legislative Advocacy with Second District PTA. And so those first two questions were about the cuts in certification were actually mine. And I have a follow-up question for Chris before he logs off. So in the fiscal stabilization plan, I noticed that the district saves $22 million just by fixing budget controls. And that amount alone exceeds the $19 million projected deficit in the multi-year projection. So does that mean that the budget controls alone balance the budget without any programmatic or staff cuts, assuming no additional expenses?
Hey, Lori. I haven't seen you since our town halls. That's a great question, and I appreciate you paid attention to that detail. The answer could technically be yes, but here's the fascinating thing. So far, just in the budget changes that I've been able to make since I've been here, we've saved well over $20 million in deficit over the 3 years. In fact, it's been significantly more than that. However, also in that same time, I've received over $20 million in new expenses that people have booked, right? So one of the things that you can be frustrated by in budget quite a bit, although I've gotten used to it over the years, is the faster I keep trying to fill in the hole, people keep digging new holes for me. And so I try not to get frustrated by that and try to look at the big picture. So we have already increased the controls in the budget, and you're seeing in this report for the first time that we've improved our fiscal standing as a result. But it's amazing to me that every day I keep getting handed new expenses, even with everybody knowing that we're in a tight fiscal. So the savings that I've made haven't been entirely wiped out, but I feel some days like they're working on digging new holes, as I said, as I fill them in. What that means is that without reducing recurring expenses, we don't make real progress. And so I've made incremental progress, but not enough to get us back to a balanced budget without doing things that are more permanent and more significant.
Right. Okay, next question. I've heard that SFUSD will actually have a budget surplus at the end of the year. Is this true?
I can try to answer that question. So we're still operating in a structural deficit, which means our planned expenditures continue to exceed our planned revenues. And when we see big balances at the end of the year, what that is, or at least last year, not this year. So last year there was a large ending balance, and that may have been because of poor forecasting of expenditures, overestimating what the district was planning to spend. And we're trying to tighten that up this year by making sure that we're dotting our I's and crossing our T's in terms of truing up our budget to actual spending so that we're not overestimating how much we're planning to spend. That's something that we're also doing in our multi-year forecast to make sure that we don't end with a big variance from what we're projecting by more than, about, I would say about 5 to 10%. Last year, this was something that led to, I believe, $100 million at the end of the year. And that's something we're trying to fix in our process as how we forecast.
Yeah, so the deficit wasn't as bad as projected last year. We still overspent by about $36 million, which is not as bad as they had thought. They were projected at about 150. So we always hope to outperform the projection, which is just what everybody submitted as their budget. We haven't had enough time pass in this fiscal year, but Niru and I have been talking about we're almost halfway through the year. So in January, when the district reopens, we need to start looking at what we call burn rates. So what people budgeted versus how much they've actually spent. So halfway through the year, you would expect that people have spent about half of their budgets, right? In compensation, in contracts and services, in whatever it is that they were budgeting. And so we're going to start looking and get a better idea of, are people spending their budgets in the way that they say they are, or are they still over budgeting and underspending? Because that was really the culture of our budget here. And do we actually take away some of that budget that they're underspending, maybe even mid-year, and we reduce the deficit mid-year and end up with a more balanced budget? So that is a possibility as well, but we don't have enough data yet. We'll have a first look at it after we get back from the holiday break and see whether they've spent about 50% or whether people are on target for the budget they submitted. That's a little bit difficult. So I think Niru and I are probably the only ones that are used to doing that. San Francisco hasn't done that before. And so we're sort of interested to see how things look after all of the December expenses hit. So it's a work in progress. We're trying to do that kind of new work here to figure these things out.
I have the next question. And I'm wondering if it's possible, if you see the chat, there's a detailed question that came in from Patrick McLaughlin, and maybe the person that doesn't answer this following question could read that, if it's possible. If not, we'll just continue. So here's the
I
question
can
that
read
I
it.
have.
Did you want me to read it and just respond, Ruben?
Yeah, if you can, quickly take a look at it.
Sure. Yes.
I think the 114 million variance might be attributable to the Fund 17 transfer of 111 million. When we did the interim projection, we did make sure we were pretty close to last year's expenditures.
Yep. So so to answer your question, and it's a great, Patrick, that's a great read of the budget. You paid attention to detail. We always appreciate that because it's a lot of work. So thank you. Yeah. So no, what it looks like after we get December expenses in, but that 114 that you're looking at includes the 111 we just put into the district reserve. And so after we get December expenses, that's exactly what we're going to be looking at, is how close are we to spending everything that was budgeted. So you have some folks that are really reading the budget here. I really do appreciate that. It's a lot of work, and sometimes I don't feel like anybody looks at it, but yes, good question.
The next question was, how does SFUSD's per pupil spending on instruction compare to other schools, both public and private?
Oh, wow. Niru, you want to try first, or I can jump in?
So I haven't seen the private per pupil spend data. That's a great question. It's definitely something we can look into. I don't think we have eyes on that actually, but it's worth researching.
Yeah. So, but consider this for a second. So let's just take an average student. I don't know any of you folks and what age your students are. I was a high school teacher. So we get on average about $12,000 per high school student, assuming that they attend all 180 days of a school year. The average tuition for a private school in San Francisco right now is between $40,000 and $60,000 a year, right? So if you just look at the allocation of dollars, 12,000 on average versus between 40 and 60. I have seen I saw one that was low near 30. But that means that a per student funding ratio, it just tells you that private per student, you're getting far more per student to run the operation. But that's always been true between public and private. And that's really the only data point that we have, is how much we get per student per year. We don't know, and private schools are not required to disclose how they're spending their money.
What steps is the district taking to assess the impact of proposed cuts and communication those impacts out?
Well, this will be my last one, and then Niru, I will leave you to everybody's questions. That's a great sort of program question. We know the impact financially and operationally, but we don't necessarily know. Actually, you folks and our teachers and our educational services folks are the ones that better know the impact, for example, to having one less clerk or one less paraeducator or not having a full-time social worker. But it's significant. So when you're in a fiscal deficit, I frequently say to the board, this one and the other boards that I've worked for, when you have to do cuts, there's no such thing as a good cut, right? We get attached to our people, we get attached to our services because it's on behalf of our children. And so there's nothing that we can say, oh, that's easy. There's no cut or reduction in a public school that's easy. But we do have to live within our resources. And that's why we're in trouble, right? Is that we've struggled to do that in the past. But we are doing a better job, and we will stay on track, and we have seen improvement, which is good. And with that, I leave you in Niru's capable hands, and I'm always happy, Karen, to schedule myself and Niru to come back if you ever want more financial information. It doesn't have to just be a one and done. If you ever have a more of a need or more of a desire to hear us babble about numbers.
Yes, definitely. Thank you again so much, Chris, for coming on.
Of course.
Really, it's
Anytime.
important. Yeah.
Anytime. And take care, and let me know if you'd like more.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Alrighty.
Take
Bye-bye.
care. Bye. Okay. Ruben, are you up next?
Yeah, and it sort of follows into your question. Do you want to read both of them, Karen?
Which one's that?
Or I can read both of them.
Okay.
So please do, it says, the first question is more of a comment. It says, please do not remove social workers from non-Title I schools and continue to be funded by central team. And the next question is, will this cut also impact the RSP teachers? So concerns about the cuts to social workers and RSP teachers and social workers, especially from non-Title I.
Yeah, so let me answer the RSP teacher first. So RSP teachers are required by statute. Actually, the Ed Code has a prescription that we must allocate a resource teacher for every 28 students. So the staffing model does not have any reductions any proposed reductions for resource teachers. If anything, what we might do is look at, are there any vacancies that can be closed, right? As a result of declining enrollment or changes in IEP need. That would be the most adjustments that would take place. So I hope that helps answer your question. And then going back to social workers, it's just as Chris had noted earlier, what we are planning to do is to wait to see where our finances look after negotiations settle, and then explore resources where we can hopefully refund plan on budgeting for additional social workers through our restricted programs, depending on what's available by the end of the year.
And I have the next two questions. We have, just for the people that are attending this session, we have two more questions that were sent in through the web, and then we'll open it up to anybody who's on the call to ask questions. And I thought maybe we could spend a minute, Niru, learning something about you. I think you're maybe new to our SFUSD. Could you tell us about your responsibilities also?
Sure. Okay. So actually, I think this is my 5th or 6th week here. I am new to SFUSD. I'm also new to San Francisco. I am the assistant superintendent / head financial officer for the district. What that means is that I currently oversee budget, accounting, payroll, and procurement. So before my stint here, I was at LA Unified School District. I was their budget director. And I was in LA for 18 years. I oversaw a budget of $18.8 billion. And they had a much bigger fiscal stabilization plan. It was $1.6 billion last June. So thankfully, this is not new to me. I've been through this before. I spent much of my career at LA Unified overseeing their special education budget. So that's actually one of my primary areas of expertise. And prior to working at LA Unified, I was a teacher in New York City, and I also worked as a researcher at the California Budget and Policy Center in Sacramento. So anyway, thank you, and I look forward to working with all of you.
Welcome, Niru, and nice to have a person with so much experience.
Thank you.
Obviously. I'll read the next question, and then you can have the last one, Karen. Does that work? I'll read the next question. How will the district ensure IEP and 504 compliance if school social workers are cut from non-Title I schools like Mariloma?
So it's not my understanding that social workers are part of an IEP. If a social worker is prescribed as part of an IEP, the social workers is funded through special education. So any reductions to non-special education resources do not impact IEP compliance. I'm not sure how it works in San Francisco Unified, but that is not that one thing that could be impacted hypothetically is assessments, right? I'm not sure how it works here, but usually it's actually the resource teacher who conducts those assessments or the special day teacher, not the social worker. That hasn't really been my experience, but I'm happy to listen more if it is a different system here. Yeah. So 504, thank you. Thank you for clarifying. 504 coordinators. So yeah, we'd have to look into that. And as Chris said, we're still looking into seeing whether there are restricted resources that we can help fund. But 504, it's not an IEP. It's not an IEP issue. I would like to make sure that's distinct. A 504 plan is separate from an IEP.
Okay, so this is the last question. Ruth Asawa School of the Arts is mandated to expand, but to sustain long student outcomes, we need funding that grows with enrollment, needed campus improvements, and raises AIR pay to match San Francisco's cost of living. How will this be reflected in district budget priorities?
Forgive me, there was a term that was used in that question that I'm not familiar. What is AR pay? What is that? I'm not familiar. There was a term reference to that question that forgive me, I'm not familiar with. But yeah, that's part of the negotiation process. So thank you for advocating for our staff. That is something that artists in residence. Okay, I'm not familiar. Forgive me. Yeah, I'm not sure how artists in residence are funded. I'm not sure if that's negotiated or if they're represented by a union. I'm happy to learn more about that so I can provide you with better information before I answer that question. But the negotiation process, if you're asking about how are we going to budget for raises for our staff, that's something that we have to, wait until the negotiation process is settled legally by statute. We cannot cite raises as part of the interim projection until they're legally approved.
Okay, so that was the end of the questions. So now we can open it up to anyone. I mean, go ahead and unmute yourself if you'd like to ask a question. Patrick, go ahead.
Hi, thanks. So I guess maybe I'm clarifying something that I heard Chris say, yeah, I think you can clarify because it's sort of in your wheelhouse. But is it fair to say that the FSP and the proposed staffing model changes are the sort of the worst case scenario if the sort of mid-year budget outlook doesn't look good, and if the negotiations sort of go sort of, I guess, on the worse is not the right word for budget negotiate or the pay negotiations, but if the number is higher, so I guess the question is, the FSP and the staffing model change the worst case scenario, and it can only get better, or based on the mid-year, could it continue to get worse?
Right. That's a terrific question. So there's a lot of unknowns, right? The federal government, for example, has threatened to pull funding for some of our neediest students. There's also the issue of we don't know how the state economy is going to look in this winter, in the upcoming new year. They've signaled that there may be less funding per schools than we previously anticipated. So you're absolutely right. It is kind of the worst case scenario right now. This is kind of the floor where we're starting, even though we are also leaving the door open to review later to see what our finances look like later in the year and explore additional funding. But you're absolutely correct. There could be other scenarios that are out of our control that we also need to prepare for. We didn't plan for things like federal cuts or state cuts in this particular FSP. So I just want to remind you all that it's just a point in time. It's a living document. So as an example, in LA, we approved a fiscal stabilization plan last June. It's getting updated again this December. So as finances change, as the fiscal outlook changes throughout the year, the FSP will likely change again. And that also comes with, as we find additional budget solutions, there's a target for the current year. Let's say we're optimistic and we exceed some of those targets, then you're absolutely correct. The notices that go out in March may be more of like a warning notice. It may not be a final notice. So I'm told last year, more people were noticed than were actually laid off. That is a possibility that may happen. That, just as you said, this is a worst case scenario. We may send more notices than we need to, but it's more of a precaution. I hope that helps.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Ruben.
I had a question about Chris's comment about every time he saves some money, the hole gets filled in by requests for more funding or new budget items. And I'm wondering who decides if this budget item gets added and is approved? With our budget deficit, wouldn't we be saying no to any new budget requests?
That's a great question. So I don't know if you heard the board. You heard the board conversation on Tuesday. Okay, so we had one board member saying we should spend 110 million on new initiatives. That's definitely one perspective. But those are the types of things that Chris is referring to, is that sometimes there are requests for more funding. Let's say, for example, we need to refresh devices for students. If the costs of those devices exceed what's in the budget, that's something that we have to consider. If there are needs, departmental needs, it's really up to the superintendent to make that decision. If there's an augmentation that needs to go out. So those are the types of things I think he might be referring to, is that there are different perspectives on our spend rate. Someone may say that they have needs that exceeds their current budget, and that's something that the superintendent would have to ultimately decide if that's something that Dr. C wants to honor. But I don't think he was talking about anything in specifically. I think it was just an example.
Can I chime in to that question? Hi, Niru. Hi, everybody. Hong Mei Pang, Head of Communications and Governance. I just want to say thank you again for having me. And, I think there are a couple of components to your question, Ruben, I think. One is, just to kind of be very clear that the $114 million that were already made in cuts last year, they are in effect right now. So there are multiple austerity measures that are in place, whether if it's, we're nixing conferences, we are, really just making sure that it's just skeletal operations, what we need, and making sure that we're prioritizing resources at school sites. That is in effect, and I think you can see and feel it, in all of our, I'm sure, schools, but also in central offices. I think the second piece to clarify is, we are deep in the budget development process for 26-27. And as part of this process, and also given the comments, there is a sort of ongoing conversation around trade-offs, right? So our expenditures are outpacing our revenue. We have a real planned deficit. And so the question is, how do we get that to balance? And we can't do everything and get to balance. We have to make tough choices. And so I think part of what the key thing to kind of take away here is, as we are having these difficult conversations, we just want to make sure that we are hearing from you all and our staff and students in terms of how do we think about these trade-offs, because we can't do everything and get to fiscal solvency. We have to make some really tough choices in the weeks and months ahead.
Thank you, Hong Mei.
Let's see. Go ahead, Marty.
Hi. Can you describe the analysis and community engagement process to determine that instructional coaches should stay at school sites, but social workers should be cut?
Okay. Hong Mei, do you mind taking a stab at that? Because, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to say first, I know many of you were at the town halls, and that was an iterative process. We learned a lot, we heard a lot. And even up until now, we know that social workers are really important. They are an important part to our school communities. I just want to be very clear what was uploaded and shared. In terms of the staffing model is only one part of the picture. What we have been working on I sit on the executive team, working with Chris, working with the superintendent directly. We have locked ourselves in a room all day today to try to figure out what are the flexibilities that we can build into next year's staffing model to fully leverage restricted funding, such as a student success fund or Title I or school-based grants, right? For school sites to have as much flexibility as possible to be able to continue having important staffing and resources like social workers. We're not quite ready to say that we figured it out, but we literally cleared our calendars and locked ourselves in a room to figure that out today. So that's number one. Number two is to your question, Marty, around instructional coaches. That was a strategy that was built into our VVGG initiatives to be able to make sure that we have robust professional development and peer learning and collaboration spaces for our teachers to be able to more effectively deliver, right? It's about raising all boats and making sure that everybody has the resources and tools and development to be able to deliver for students. Now, we're engaging with people like you, our parent leaders at schools, and also we're hearing from principals and teachers in terms of thinking about efficacy, looking at our STAR assessment data, and really evaluating and making sure that we're being responsive as we go into this next year in how we want to prioritize and align our investments with our student outcome goals. So I just appreciate sort of you raising this. It is a trade-off conversation, but also it's we need to we are rolling our sleeves up to figure out how to not purely operate on a deficit framework. So it's hard work and we appreciate you all doing it with us.
Thank you.
Monica?
Yeah, hi. I'm a parent at Denman and at Longfellow Elementary. And I just want to know, as a parent and a busy working parent, how do I contribute to try and help with these issues to help with the budget things when you're just doing what you can?
So I can try to answer that. One thing I would encourage you is, I do think this forum is very helpful for us because we get to hear the perspectives from our parents and from our community on what proposals make sense for our students and supporting our students and what proposals don't. So we are hearing everyone's feedback and we're taking it very seriously. And I would encourage you to just keep using your voice in these forums in order to help inform us make better decisions.
And
Okay, thank you.
And I just want to chime in and say thank you so much for being a parent with us and for being at Longfellow and Denman. I also just want to lift up the fact that as we are doing our budget development, there are multiple opportunities for you to get involved at your school sites. So in addition to the PTA, which is yay, thank you, Second District, for sort of including and working with us. Every school has a school site council that comprises of parents, staff, community, administrators, students to really help inform the school planning process and the school budgeting process. And that happens in the spring. And so I think your voice and your involvement, all of you, and your participation there is critical. Last year, we did the really important work of lining up our VBGGs, our student outcome goals, with our LCAP, which is the governing document for how we invest to be able to meet our educational and legal obligations. And so we need you all to make sure that we are staying on track, and that happens at your school site. So I just want to encourage you all to look out for that. There's a school planning summit that's going to be happening at the end of January, I believe. And so definitely want to make sure that we encourage as much participation as possible.
Sorry, Hong Mei, this is Tina. Just quick, this is an earlier summit than usual, right? We usually meet in March, is that correct?
Yes, Tina, you are absolutely right. So, as part of the early budgeting process, and I'm gonna let Niru maybe talk about the timeline. I just get excited because, we are moving up the timeline, and it's gonna be in January instead of the February, March, which we heard last year was way too late. Niru, please chime in.
Yeah, so by state statute, we have to notify our affected employees by March 15th if their assignments might be changing or if their hours might be changing. So many times on the classified side, we see that the hours that of their service might change based on a local school site decision. So in order to do right by our staff and help meet those deadlines for notification, we are moving up the budget development timeline. Our schools will be notified on January 5th of their budget allocations, and they'll have until the end of January to finish making those decisions. And then that gives us ample time to accurately notify our staff. We don't want to do a widespread notice like we did last year. We want to do this a lot more carefully because it sets off a lot of panic. So that is the intent of moving up the timeline. We know that there's going to be obviously opportunities for improvement, and we'll listen and learn during this process and hope to have a more comprehensive process of following budget cycle. Okay.
Great. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah. I had asked the question. I had submitted this question, and it wasn't addressed. So I don't know what it was, but based on the town halls, there were the polls that were given to us to fill out said that people preferred more budget to go towards teachers, and it seems that the admin makes significantly more, and then they're receiving significantly more raises and bonuses and things of that nature. What constitutes the levels at which people are paid?
So Michael, that's negotiated. I think that's part of the negotiation process. I hear an echo. I'm going to try to answer. So you probably noticed that our administrators, their agreement was approved first, and we're still waiting for the labor negotiation process to take place for our teachers and for educators. And that's how those decisions, how they get paid. The pay is negotiated.
Okay. Sure.
Thank you. All right. I'm sorry, maybe Lori, do you have another question?
You're on mute, Lori.
Okay.
Lori, you're muted.
Lori, we can't hear you.
Hi, sorry.
Hi.
Okay, so I have a question about the staffing model. Is
Yes.
that based on worst case scenario instead of actual budget projections right now? And are the school site budgets based on worst case scenario too? And if so, I mean, shouldn't we base those on the current projections and just adjust them later if you need to?
So you're absolutely right. I think Chris mentioned this before, it's that we are listening to all the feedback as part of this process. So it is right now at this point in time, we are planning to base our budget development on this staffing model. Barring there may be changes between now and January. It is possible. But that is our current plan right now. And as Chris mentioned, we're still evaluating where we might have additional savings. So if there is an opportunity for us to fund social workers in another program, because we are hearing the feedback, that is something we're definitely looking into as soon as we're done with negotiations.
Okay, and just so for my clarity, so the current staffing model is based on an assumption that there will be some type of raise, or will that change if there are raises?
So it's hard for me to forecast, Lori. I apologize. But right now in time, this staffing model is assuming we statutorily we cannot go to the CD and say we're planning for X amount of raises and this is the FSP or the staffing model as a result of those raises. So this is pre-raise, but we are looking to see where we land after the raises, and if we do find the budget savings available in some of our restricted programs to fund those social workers, that is a strategy we are definitely looking at pursuing.
Okay, so I'm
So
just
I
not
can't
sure.
give more information because we're in the middle of negotiations. So yeah,
I just want to dig in to make sure I understand. So the fiscal stabilization plan is worst case scenario, assuming there might be raises, right? Because we don't need $50 million of cuts right now. I thought the staffing model was based on the fiscal stabilization plan.
It
Are you
is,
saying?
yeah. It's so right. So when we submit this to the CDE by law, we cannot say that we're doing this 50 million fiscal stabilization plan based on any raises because we don't know what the outcome of those raises are. So you're absolutely correct. We have to wait, and there is a chance that there may be an update once negotiations are done. It is possible, but it's not. It's something we're trying to avoid.
Here's what I'm getting at. Let's just say hypothetically, you don't come to agreement and you don't give raises, but people have submitted their site budgets in January based on an FSP and staffing model that's based on those raises. I'm having trouble it seems to me the site model and the site budgets, the staffing model and site budgets could be based on what you actually know right now, right? And then if you needed to adjust in the future, you could.
Can I give this a shot?
Yeah.
Okay. And you can swat me away, Niru, and be like,
no
you're
problem.
wrong. I don't have a problem with that. Hi, Lori. Nice to see you. Okay, so a couple of things. One is what the FSP does is that it provides the district with some parameters of how we can make reductions to get to our target of a balanced budget, right? So just really important definition. Chris probably already said this, so just want to reiterate. And what it does is, because right now, during this period, leading into like even February, there are multiple things that we don't know. One is labor. The other thing is the state budget, right? So the governor releases his budget January 15th. There is a process where that can be in flux, and most of our funding comes from the state. So in addition to the local context that we're in, there's also a big unknown in terms of how the allocations may or may not change from the state. And all of this is based on projection. And locally, it's based on student enrollment and projected trends. So given that there's a lot that we don't know, what we're bringing to the board right now is to be able to say, proof to CDE, yes, we are using a plan that we are putting in place with these parameters to be able to close the the planned and the structural deficit that the district is anticipating for the next year and the 2 years following that, right? And so, Lori, your question is a really, really good one. And the answer is, this is an iterative process. Budget development happens since, when we started in the fall, all the way, right, into June. And so, which is why there's a second interim report where an updated FSP is going to be submitted to prove again to the state that we can afford the things that we want to do next year and the next 2 years. Your question around what is the staffing model built around? The staffing model is built around student enrollment. Resources follow student enrollment. And student enrollment is all based on, every year also, if you are involved, that we set capacities at schools based on these projections. Now that's going to change, right? Because there's a true up that happens in a new school year every year when you get your actual ADA at the 10-day count. So these things are going to constantly be in flux. I know it's very unsettling, but the reality is we are planning with the best information that we have right now. And I just want to say, Niru being here, Chris being here, they've done massive cleanup to get our fiscal and operational systems in a much better place where we can more accurately project and be able to do better fiscal planning to be more responsible and be more responsive to the needs of our students. So I think, part of this work is really being able to continue to do that to get to firmer ground and more stable ground.
So are the sites locked into the budgets that they submit at the end of January? Or are those, can they change those
So
later?
yeah, great question. So there's always a chance that things may change, right? Enrollment might change, right? So whatever we put in is, I will put it this way, barring some kind of economic catastrophe or, something that we can't cover with our reserve, what we give out in January is expected to be the base allocation to school sites. There may be a chance that should enrollment grow or we find more money in the budget, that there could be changes again after January and that we can rescind any notices that may have gone out in March. That's our best case scenario. But our worst case scenario, just as we had kind of said, is that the worst case scenario is that this, whatever we go out in January is the budget and there's no additional changes. We're hoping that's not the case. We're very optimistic that we can find additional resources to support some of these programs that many of you are advocating for.
And looking into March, actually, if you will allow me to do so, we are required by state law to issue preliminary layoff notices by March. And that is when we are gonna actually through our actions demonstrate that there is going to be a reduction in our workforce, if that is in fact the strategy that we're going to take to close the budget. And these are positions, right? These are closed positions.
Right, but the budget is currently balanced, right? You only need to do that if there are raises that haven't been given yet. And so I'm wondering why we're planning the staffing model and site budgets in January with.
Yeah. So Laura, let me try to explain. So you're correct that we do have enough of a fund balance to help pay our bills for the next 2 years. The issue that the CDE has cited us for is that we are in a structural deficit, right? We can't keep dipping into fund balances to help pay our expenses. It's kind of like, I think one example I give is if, my nephew got a gift from his grandma and was counting on that gift to pay for an ongoing expense, like his rent. That's not a sustainable solution, right? That's kind of a one-time gift or a one-time cash bonus that you should use for one-time expenses. And that is where we get into trouble, is saying that, well, we're balanced for the next 3 years, so we should be okay. What we've been advised to do is to make sure that our revenues and our expenses line up. And that is the work that we're doing with the fiscal stabilization plan. So I do appreciate your advocacy. I just think that we also need to focus on making sure that we're on a path to fiscal solvency, and positive certification in June is what we're all hoping for.
Great. We have 2 minutes left. Patrick, go.
Yeah, thank you. This is a follow-up to my earlier comment, and sort of actually relates to the last point, and is a follow-up to my question earlier about the fact that it looks like we spend on, or projecting to spend 114 million this year compared to last year, despite the budget cuts. Even if we take out the reserve money that we put aside, does that mean that we cut our budget by 104 million, but we're on track to spend the same? Is that how I should read those two facts?
Forgive me, Patrick. I missed the beginning.
So
I heard something about 104 million.
Sorry, I know this is hard without.
Yeah,
I need a
do you
whiteboard.
mind? Yeah.
Well, I'll try to slow it down. So
Okay, thank you.
there was 114 million more spend projected for this year than the unaudited actuals for last year. 114 million higher is what I saw in the interim report from this week.
So you're saying that our expenses are 114 million higher in 25-26 than they were in 24-25.
That's what I read in the interim budget report. And
In
I
the
know that
interim budget
includes the
report,
reserve potentially.
And that includes the reserve. You're absolutely right. So most of that is the reserve.
So let's say it's all the reserve just for the sake of easy math.
Correct.
We also had very significant budget cuts this year.
Yes.
To the tune of 100 million. So what that means is that we cut our budget by 100 million this year, but are on track to spend the same as we did last year. Is that
so that
true?
Yeah, so it goes back to what I was saying about ongoing, aligning our ongoing expenses versus our one-time savings account, right? So a savings account, basically what Fund 17 tries to do, and they're two separate things. So I'll try to speak very slowly so that because it's a bit technical, and I don't want anyone to get lost in the details. So basically, the CD recommends that districts have a reserve, right? As they recommend 17%, which is 2 months of expenses. In this case, this reserve that was just approved by the board this last Tuesday is a one-time transfer, right? And that transfer and you're absolutely right, that transfer was based on an ending fund balance from last year. So we are using that transfer we're not meeting the CD's recommendation. CD's recommendation, I guess, is 17%. This gets us to only 8%, which is about half of that. What these ongoing cuts do, it addresses, and I also want to be clear here, the fiscal stabilization plan is not an automatic cut. It is just a plan. It just provides a roadmap. So I also want to reiterate again that this is just a proposed plan and point in time. But ongoing reductions help us get out of a structural deficit, which is when you have ongoing expenses that exceed your revenues. So one thing I kind of want to go back to the example of my nephew, right? If your expenses, if you have an income and your monthly expenses are constantly exceeding your income, and you're relying on, some one-time gifts here and there to make ends meet, that's not a sustainable path. That is something that could put you in credit card debt, right? And in this case, we're trying to avoid going back into negative certification and losing local control.
Yeah.
So I know that there are two different things. It's a bit complicated, but I hope I helped answer your question.
Well, I understand the reserve. I'm not even bothered by that. I'm more worried about the fact that it seems like if you take the reserve out of the picture, we reduced our budget by 100 million-ish this year, and yet we're on track to spend the same.
Yes. So you're saying
that is alarming to me. We're trying to spend $100 million less, and we're spending the same.
Okay, I see the point that you're making now. You're saying that our actual is about the same as last year, even with the reductions that were made.
Correct.
Yeah.
Which lowers my confidence that
Yes. Okay. So I see what you're saying. So yeah, your analysis is correct. We're still on track to spend about the same. And I think that is something that with some of the budget analysis that we plan to do to see where we can cut spending this year in terms of non-labor, that's one of the pieces that is we still need to address in the current year in order to curtail spending. So thank you.
Great, thanks.
Hey, thank you so much. It's 7:33, so but we really had a great conversation. Thank you again, Niru and Hong Mei for being here. We will definitely hold something like this again. So again, if you have any questions, you feel free to, contact us at the second district. Any of the questions that may have not been answered this tonight, we will try to, because it may have not been relevant to the budget, but I will try and take these questions and get them answered for you. And we will put it in our second district newsletter, which comes out on Tuesday. I hope everyone's subscribed to that. So we will try and answer these questions for you. So again, thank you so much, guys, for joining us. Have happy holidays, and we'll be in touch. We'll
Thank you.
talk again. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks
Thank
all.
you very
Thank you.
much.
Take
Thanks
care.
so
Good
much.
night.